All right, let's jump right in and get ready to take this deep dive into the world of plant guilds.
Yes.
We've got so much to talk about.
Yeah.
All about designing a garden that's not just a bunch of pretty plants, but actually acts like a self-sustaining mini ecosystem.
It's fascinating going beyond just, planting things together because they look good together.
Right.
With plant guilds, we're talking about strategically grouping plants that benefit each other.
So it's less about the look and more about the function.
Think of it like creating a little society in your garden where each plant has a specific role to play supporting its neighbors and the overall health of the garden.
I love that, a plant society.
Yeah.
That makes me think, what are some of the benefits to this kind of approach?
Well, you'll end up having less work.
Okay.
Healthier plants, natural pest control, and even potentially bigger harvests.
That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin with these plant societies?
Well, first we need to understand the basics of a guild. And it all starts with what's called an anchor plant. This is like the star of the guild, often a larger perennial like a fruit tree or a main crop.
All right. So if I decide I want to build a guild around, say, an apple tree,
sure,
what do I do next?
Well, then you want to think about the location. Sunlight, water, and soil type will all influence your choices.
Okay, so you mean even if two plants, would benefit each other, I still have to make sure that they're in the right conditions.
Exactly. For example, if your apple tree is in a sunny spot with well-drained soil, you'll want to choose companion plants that like those conditions as well.
That makes sense.
Oh.
So we're thinking about what plants can help each other, but also what will thrive in the same spot.
Right, and that's where it gets really fun.
Okay.
We start thinking about what teammates we want to bring in to support that apple tree.
Teammates, I like that.
Yeah.
So what kind of teammates are we looking for here?
This is where something called companion planting comes in, understanding how certain plants naturally help each other.
Okay. For example, some plants release chemicals that repel pests, while others attract beneficial insects that prey on those pests.
Oh, like tomatoes and basil. I've heard that basil can help keep bugs away from the tomatoes.
That's a classic example. Basil repels tomato hornworms, white flies, and even aphids. Plus, it can enhance the flavor of the tomatoes as well.
Oh, wow. So it's like a win-win.
Exactly.
Okay, so basil is going on my tomato team for sure.
Yeah.
What about our apple tree? What kind of teammates would work well there?
Apple trees benefit from daffodils. They not only add a burst of color in the spring, but they also repel burrowing rodents that can damage the roots.
Oh, so pretty and functional. I like that.
Exactly.
So we got daffodils for pest control. What else could we add to this apple tree guild?
You could add a nitrogen-fixing ground cover, like clover, around the base of the tree. Clover helps to improve soil fertility.
Okay, so that benefits the apple tree and any other plants nearby.
Exactly.
So we got daffodil, we got clover. What else could we put in there?
Well, comfrey is another excellent choice.
It's what's known as a dynamic accumulator, which means it has deep roots that can pull up nutrients from the subsoil, making them available to shallower rooted plants.
So it's like a little miner going down and bringing stuff up for the apple tree.
Exactly. It acts as a living fertilizer, constantly enriching the soil around the apple tree.
Wow, that's amazing. And all these plants together, they really do start to make this picture of an ecosystem, where everything is supporting everything else.
Right.
But I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Like, how do I keep all of these different plants happy and healthy?
That's understandable.
Yeah.
It can seem like a lot, but the good news is once they're established, guilds can actually be easier to maintain than a traditional garden.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, how do I even get started?
The most important thing is observation. Regularly checking your plants for any signs of stress pests or diseases.
So basically, look for any problems before they get out of control.
Exactly. Think of yourself like a detective.
Okay.
Looking for clues about what your plants need.
Okay, so observation is key. What about other maintenance practices?
Watering is crucial.
Okay.
And deep watering less often is much better than frequent shallow watering.
Okay, so like giving them a good soak every once in a while rather than just a little sprinkle every day.
Right. You want those roots to grow deep and strong.
Makes sense. What about mulch?
Mulch is a guild gardener's best friend. It helps retain moisture, suppress weeds, and adds nutrients to the soil as it breaks down.
Okay, mulch. I'm starting to see how all these practices can lead to a healthier garden. But what happens when things go wrong?
Yeah.
Even with the best care, can't we still have problems sometimes?
Of course, things don't always go according to plan. That's where troubleshooting comes in.
Okay.
One common problem is overcrowding. Sometimes we underestimate how big plants will get, or things just get a little too cozy and they start competing for resources.
Okay, I've definitely been there.
So how do we handle that?
Yeah, how do we deal with overcrowding?
Well, regular assessment is key if you notice plants are starting to crowd each other.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate to thin them out or relocate them. You want to make sure everyone has enough room to breathe.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
No, it's about being attentive and adjusting as needed.
So plant guilds, they're dynamic systems?
Exactly. They're constantly evolving.
I like that. And we need to evolve with them.
Right. It's like a living puzzle.
Okay. I'm starting to see the appeal of that living puzzle. But what are some other common problems that we might encounter with our guilds?
Well, pest infestations are always a concern, but in a well-designed guild, you have a diverse range of plants, which naturally attracts beneficial insects.
Okay. So that's like having a built-in pest control system.
Exactly.
But how do I know which bugs are the good guys, and what if those natural defenses aren't enough?
That's a great question, and something we'll dive into later on. We'll talk about how to identify beneficial insects, attract more of them to your garden, and what to do if pests become a problem.
All right, looking forward to that. So we talked about overcrowding and pests. What are some other potential challenges?
Well, diseases can pop up from time to time, but again, diversity is key. A healthy guild is much better equipped to resist diseases. And just like with pests, there are organic solutions available if you do need to treat a disease, but we'll cover those in more detail later.
Okay, so diversity observation and proactive care. Those are the keys to success with guild gardening.
That's a good way to put it.
So what else should we be thinking about as we go forward on this guild journey?
Well, remember those ecological interactions we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those play a crucial role in the success of a guild. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore those interactions in a lot more detail, understanding how these plants can work together to create that thriving, resilient ecosystem.
Okay, I can't wait. Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's really dig into these ecological interactions that we see in plant guilds. These are what make guilds so much more than just, a bunch of plants growing next to each other.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, well, one of the most important interactions is called mutualism.
Mutualism.
Where two or more species interact in a way that benefits all involved.
So everyone wins.
Exactly, a win-win situation, like a perfect partnership in the plant world.
I like that. So can you give us an example of mutualism, like how this works in a guild?
Absolutely. A classic example is nitrogen fixation. Legumes like beans and peas have a special relationship with bacteria that live in their roots.
Okay.
And these bacteria can convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form that plants can use. So they're basically creating their own fertilizer.
Wow. So the bacteria are like little nitrogen factories.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
That's awesome.
And the amazing thing is this nitrogen doesn't just benefit the legumes themselves.
Okay.
It also benefits neighboring plants in the guild, making the whole system more fertile.
So it's like a chain reaction of good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool.
It really highlights, how interconnected everything is in nature.
I see that.
Another key interaction is competition reduction.
In nature, plants are constantly competing for resources.
Yeah.
Sunlight, water, nutrients.
Right, the jungle out there.
But in a well-designed guild, we can actually minimize that competition.
Okay, so how do we do that? Do we have to step in and be the referee?
No, not quite. It's all about careful planning. By selecting and spacing our plants thoughtfully, we can make sure everyone has what they need. For example, we can choose plants with different root depths, so they're not all trying to get nutrients from the same layer of soil.
Oh, so it's like, giving everybody their own little space.
Exactly. And by reducing that competition, we ensure that all the plants have a chance to thrive. Now let's talk about one of my favorite benefits of plant guilds.
Okay.
Pest control.
Yes.
Certain plants can naturally repel pests or attract beneficial predators.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's like having a built-in security system for your garden.
I love that.
And the best part is it's all natural.
Right.
You don't need to use those harsh pesticides that can disrupt the ecosystem.
Can you give me some examples of plants that are good for this? Absolutely. Marigolds, for example, are known to repel nematodes and other soil-dwelling pests.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they release a substance that's toxic to a lot of those harmful insects.
So marigolds are like the bouncers of the garden.
I don't like that.
Keeping those bad bugs out.
Right. Another great example is basil.
Basil
repels flies and mosquitoes, and it's also believed to deter tomato hornworms.
Right. So that's going back to that tomato and basil dream team.
Exactly. They have each other's backs in more ways than one.
I love that. Have you ever heard of the Three Sisters Guild?
Of course, it's a classic example of ecological synergy.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I don't really know how it works.
Well, it involves corn, beans, and squash, and they each play a specific role in supporting the others.
Oh, sounds cool.
So the corn provides a sturdy stalk for the beans to climb up.
Okay.
The beans, being legumes, fix nitrogen in the soil, which benefits all three plants. And the squash, with its big, broad leaves, sprawls along the ground, suppressing weeds and conserving moisture.
Wow. They really are like, three sisters looking out for each other.
It's a great example of how plants can work together to create that thriving ecosystem.
That's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about mutualism, competition, reduction, pest control. Is there anything else that we should know about these interactions, before we actually start building a guild?
Well, pollination enhancement is crucial, for fruit and seed production, and it's something that plant guilds can be really good at.
Yeah, I can see how having a variety of different plants would attract different pollinators.
Exactly, and by including a diversity of flowering plants in our guilds, we're creating this buffet for pollinators, attracting, bees, butterflies, all those good bugs.
It's like a pollinator party.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that increases the chances that our plants are going to get pollinated, which means more and healthier fruits and vegetables.
Oh, I like that. So we've got all these amazing interactions happening. But how do we actually use this information? How do we start building these guilds in our own gardens?
That's a great question. And that's where the real fun begins. In the next part of our deep dive, we're going to walk through the process of designing and building a guild, from choosing that anchor plant to picking those perfect plant companions and creating those beneficial layers.
Perfect. I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we've talked about all these ecological interactions happening in plant guilds. I'm ready to see some real-world examples. Like how do we actually build these things, and what are some of the challenges we might run into?
Okay, so let's start with a classic, the apple tree guild. Picture a mature apple tree as your anchor reaching for the sky. Underneath, you've got comfrey, that dynamic accumulator we talked about, pulling up nutrients from deep down nearby. You've got daffodils adding a burst of color, but also deterring those rodents. And then weaving through it all is a nitrogen-fixing ground cover, like clover, enriching the soil for everyone.
Okay, I can see it now. It sounds beautiful and functional.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we make sure that all those ecological interactions we talked about,
they're
actually happening?
Well, think about it. The comfrey is feeding the apple tree with nutrients it wouldn't normally be able to reach. The daffodils are protecting the roots from pests, and the clover is constantly adding nitrogen to the soil, benefiting everyone. Plus, you could add in some pollinator-attracting flowers, like yarrow or borage, to make sure that those apple blossoms get pollinated and get a nice big harvest.
So we're really maximizing the benefits here. It's making me rethink my whole garden. I've always just planted things wherever I had space, but this is so much more strategic.
It's really about creating those beneficial relationships. And it's not just limited to fruit trees. You can build a guild around almost any plant. Let's say you love tomatoes.
Oh, I do love a good tomato.
Okay, so your tomato plant is your anchor. Now add some basil nearby to repel those pests, and maybe even make those tomatoes taste even better. Then throw in some marigolds for extra pest deterrence. And for a ground cover, you could try nasturtiums. They act as a trap crop, attracting aphids away from your tomatoes.
Okay, so each plant has a job to do. It's all coming together now.
Exactly. And remember those ecological interactions we talked about. In this tomato guild, the basil and marigolds are protecting the tomatoes. That's mutualism. The nasturtiums are sacrificing themselves to save the tomatoes, and the different root depths of each plant are minimizing competition.
I see it.
Oh.
Okay, this is all very exciting, but I know things don't always go perfectly. What are some common problems that people run into with guilds, and how do we fix them?
Well, even experienced guild gardeners have challenges. Sometimes we just forget how big those cute little seedlings are going to get.
Oh yeah, I am definitely guilty of that. My eyes are always bigger than my garden space.
It happens. The key is to be proactive. Regularly check your guild, and don't be afraid to thin things out or relocate plants. Pruning is your friend.
Okay, pruning noted. What about pests and diseases? I feel like those are always a concern.
You're right, but remember, guilds are designed to be more resilient. The diversity of plants attracts beneficial insects that can take care of those pests, and healthy soil helps prevent diseases. But if you do have problems, a good approach is something called integrated pest management, or IPM.
Okay, IPM. I've heard of that, but what exactly does it mean?
So IPM focuses on prevention and using natural methods whenever possible. For example, you can attract beneficial insects to your garden, like ladybugs or lacewings. And if you need to treat something, you can use organic solutions like neem oil or insecticidal soap.
So basically work with nature, not against it.
Exactly. Create that balance. Another issue you might notice is that some plants in your guild just aren't thriving. Maybe they're not growing as well, or they just look a little sad. This could mean that the plant isn't happy where it is, or maybe it's not compatible with its neighbors.
So what do you do then? Just trial and error?
Observation is key. Pay attention to how your plants are responding and be willing to experiment. Maybe move a plant to a different spot or try a different species altogether. It's all about finding those perfect combinations.
It's so interesting. It's a much more dynamic way of gardening than I'm used to.
It really is. It's like this ongoing conversation with your garden. You're constantly learning and adapting.
This has been an amazing deep dive. I'm feeling so inspired to start my own plant guild and see what I can create.
That's great to hear. And remember, there's no one right way to do it. It's all about exploring, experimenting, and having fun. Who knows what amazing discoveries you'll make along the way.
That's so true.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into plant guilds. We hope you learned a lot, and we're excited to see what you create in your own gardens. Happy gardening, everyone!